When at our last convention, we had a breakout meeting with the Conservation Committee, and someone had mentioned that our committee should look at establishing a program for endangered plants, much as zoos establish programs for endangered animals. And we're looking into that and how to do that. But if you have plants with provenance that are rare and endangered, we'll be publishing a hit list of plants to start with. If you're interested in participating, harass me, write me. We'll keep you in the loop. This is a chance for us on the Conservation Committee. We've been looking for an opportunity where we can provide hands-on conservation or the plant lovers that are a member of our society. It's one thing to support programs financially, but it's another to actually participate. And that's what we're hoping to do. So let me know, and the committee is well on its way. We hope to have word of a more developed program at the time of the convention. And since everyone loves true crime shows, I'm going to present Dr. Cowell. Did I pronounce your name correctly, Carly?
That's correct, yes.
Accidents happen, sorry. But she is the director of BGCI, the Botanical Gardens. I thought I wrote down. What is it? Botanical Gardens
Conservation International.
International. Thank you. Sometimes you get so used to repeating the abbreviation that you forget what it's the full.
Yeah.
But her talk is on illegal plant trade. So with that, I will turn you over to her good hands. I'm going to allow her to share her screen.
There we go.
And we should be good to go.
Yeah. Okay. I hope you can see my screen there.
We can. And I'm going to turn off my video and audio now.
Okay. Well, fantastic. And thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to some, perhaps. I'm going to talk today about BGCI's campaign to tackle illegal trade of threatened plant species. So I'm the Director of Conservation Policy and Practice at BGCI. I'm also the chair of the IUCN SSC task force for succulent plants that are being illegally traded as well. So it ties in nicely. But this campaign that I'm talking about for BGCI is all plants, not just the succulent species, although being the chair, you'll see I've got a lot of pictures of succulent species. But what is the problem? Why have a campaign against illegal plant trade? Well, wildlife trafficking is the third largest illegal trade in the world, following after narcotics and illegal armaments. And a lot of people, when you say wildlife, they suddenly think of the rhino or ivory or pangolin, but it does include plants. Wildlife includes plants and animals. And when we look at some of the statistics that have been looked at a few years ago, and there's some recent ones coming out now, when you look at plant trade, it outstrips animal trade vastly. And then there's the illegal side to that as well. So It was calculated in 2019, and that was a report that came out prior to COVID, that 15 billion US dollars are lost due to illegal wildlife trade of plants alone. That does include timber, which is very high value, but living plant collections as well. So we're talking a massive scale here, huge problem. And consumers are unaware of the extinction of species caused by illegal trade from plants in the wild. Here in the UK, a lot of consumers who are buying house plants online aren't even aware that plants come from the wild. It's gotten that bad. It's quite scary. So we really need to make people aware that plants do come from the wild, and that they can be taken and over-harvested from the wild and then causes extinction. And in fact, more plants go extinct annually due to trade than animals do. Since the 1800s, 571 plant species have gone extinct from human consumption caused by humans, not climate change back then or anything else. And this disrupts ecosystems, has a knock-on effect, and this can be seen throughout history when we've had the loss of pollinators, our crops have been lost, we've lost animals that are key to ecosystems because their food source has been lost due to illegal plant trade. And then we have a loss of cultural and traditional knowledge. And this is also a huge problem because the way that people, indigenous and native people, use the plants that they live with may be the next cure for Alzheimer's or cancer. And we just don't know that. And the loss of the knowledge and the plants, we could really be doing ourselves a great disservice. And as I've said, it leads to extinction of species. And this particular species is orchid that I've got on the screen. It was discovered as a new species in 2010, and within 6 months of it being described, 99% of the plants have been collected from the wild. And this was not by the taxonomists and the botanists. This was just pure plant trade. It's a new species, high demand, very pretty. It got put on the internet, and it was facilitating the trade directly with the people on the ground who went out and poached it. In 2015, there were less than 10 mature plants left in the wild. It is now functionally extinct in the wild. It's a term for conservation where it just cannot continue on its own. But luckily, specimens were taken and kept in botanic gardens, and they are now being cultivated and slowly reintroduced, but the locality is not sort of told where they're coming from. It's also being produced and mass marketed to discourage wild harvesting. Another problem, which many of you may be very familiar with, is cacti from Mexico. And cacti is one of the first plant groups that was listed, or one of the first whole groups listed on CITES. Because of illegal trade, and it's very easy to still find cacti on the internet that are clearly wild harvested. Trade is predominantly between Mexico and the US and Mexico and Europe. In fact, demand is increasing in Europe. We've seen a lot of seizures recently. And, we're looking at the usuals, the mammillarias, and a lot of the very old cactus that are taken from the wild. They've been there for years, and they're lost to people, to the ecosystem, and it really is causing extinction of species in the wild. More recently, and closer to my native country, South Africa, prior to 2019, probably 2018, it started picking up. They noticed that a lot of the succulents, particularly the conophytum species, were being poached from the wild and illegally traded. And this took off during the pandemic of COVID, when everyone went into lockdown and there were no rangers to do patrolling, there were no police on the roads to stop and check vehicles, and poaching just really took a peak. And to date, there's probably about 1.5 million illegally harvested succulent plants that we know of. And that's only the tip of the iceberg, because often you only catch a small amount of the illegally harvested plants. The The rest actually do get away and they get to destinations. And we know they're going to Korea, to Japan, and to China, and now moving into Europe as well. And to date, there are 9 species now extinct in the wild since 2019 due to this mass poaching. And the South African National Biodiversity Institute, which is the group of botanic gardens in South Africa, mandated to receive these plants and care for them, are receiving about 3,000 plants a week. And that's across their 3 botanic gardens in the Richtersveld, which is on the Namibian border, Kirstenbosch Botanic Gardens in Cape Town, and the Karoo Botanic Garden, which is near a town called Worcester, in the Karoo itself. But why is this all happening, and why does it seem to be so much faster than in years gone by? And we have seen, and there's many studies, that the internet has accelerated the trade in plants. The internet has done fantastic things for us, opened markets, increased access for people who would never have been able to sell their wares to a bigger market. But there's also the dark side of the internet, and that it's a cyber hotspot for buyers and sellers to connect. It's anonymous. You don't have to know who is selling you the plants, just there's pretty pictures of them and you buy them and you get them in the post. There's also very little risk of getting caught at all, because no one's looking for plants that are being illegally sold on the internet. There is more work currently taking place for illegal animal trade, for ivory, rhino horn, pangolin scales, that kind of thing. It is easier to spot, and they have search engines and AI, which does this automatically. It's very difficult for plants. And so the plant poachers actually use the surface web, which is the web most of us use every day to trade. It's Facebook, it's Etsy, it's eBay. They use that because they know they won't get caught, and there's no filters on those big internet platforms at this stage for plants. Legislation on illegal wildlife trade is weak, even for the animals. It's worse for plants. There's no sentences, very little fines. Maybe people get sent out the country and back to their home if they're coming into South Africa, for instance, from Korea, but then nothing else happens. And it is easy, once again, as I said, to buy something online and just pop it in the post, goes through the postal service or with a courier, and it circumvents a lot of the border checks where major imports and exports take place. So we do have this problem. What it boils down to for botanic gardens is that we're also experiencing, we have 900 members of BGCI who are botanic gardens. Majority of those are in North America, in Canada, the USA, Mexico, and they're coming to us and they're saying, we are having plants poached out of our gardens. They're not even going into the wild anymore. They know the rare species and the old species that they're really looking for, and they're taking them from the gardens themselves. At the same time, gardens like those in South Africa, Mexico, and actually there's a few in California that are CITES rescue centers for plants in the US, are just being overwhelmed by the volume of material that's coming to them. There's a limited capacity to exchange material. So once it's been poached out of a country, say from Angola, and it's now gone across and it's in France, they can't repatriate it back to Angola if they wanted. It's the poachers can do it, but when you're doing it on the right side of the law, the red tape is absolutely ludicrous. We're losing our collections. I'm sure many of you can understand that. You have collections, you foster these plants, they're like your children, and we're losing those. And we have reputational risk. If we then take collections from people who don't have provenance or permits, they could be illegitimate collections. And the botanic gardens are being approached and people trying to sell them plants now, which is also a bit of a strange thing. So what is happening with enforcement? Well, they've got their own challenges, but there's some positives that are coming out of this. Like I said, there's AI tools that are helping tackle the scale of the internet trade, that are monitoring this. And Kew Gardens actually had a project and developed FloraGuard, which is an AI tool that can monitor chatter on some of these open platforms and look for keywords. So they could look for conophytum or button plant or cordiciform or anything we want to put in there that we know is a buzzword at that stage in trade, and it'll actually pull out there's some heavy chatter and you can track that. We're working with the courier companies and the postal services, and there's more machinery now that can scan for packages that have plant material in them. There is a difficulty in identifying species, and many of you will be able to identify the species that you know, but you can understand that border officials who are not botanists or horticulturalists or maybe even passionate about plants have to identify all these green things that are coming in a package. So a lot of the gardens are actually working with them to help train them in basic plant identification or sharing pictures, like you can see Border Force on the top right of the screen. They do come and send photos to us, and we'll send it to the relevant experts, and they'll identify and say, yes, this is what it is. It's euphorbia. It shouldn't be in the post. It's illegal. And then we're also working with Stop Wildlife Crime Online, which is looking to have a global internet jurisdiction and legal entities, so that if something is caught in the post, the problem at the moment is it US law? Is it UK law? Where did it come from? Is it the law of Mexico where the cactus came from? And they're actually looking at a standard internet trade law that says it's just not right, and you can prosecute on those laws no matter which country you're in. This is just a brief slide on the difficulty in identifying plants that have been taken from the wild versus legitimately cultivated plants that should be on sale and should be in the market, and promoting having plants in your life, and just how difficult it is. So you can see on the top left of the screen, that species there has been taken from the wild. Its roots, although big, they've grown between a rock crevice, and the plant itself has grown around a rock. It hasn't come from a pot, versus the one at the bottom, which looks like it's been cultivated, the conophytum, but it actually hasn't. It has been taken from the wild and bolstered up. It's also grown in a rock crevice, so it's very difficult. And the Monsonia on the right of the screen, clearly the top one is potted, grown, cultivated. It's grown up, it's towards the light, whereas the ones that grow actually in the wild are flat and prostrate, and all not very uniform, obviously wind blown, trampled by some animals. So these are the kind of guides and things that we're working to develop with the enforcement officers so they can actually see. And then the task force that I'm chair of for succulents particularly is looking at a guide for consumers to say, if you're online and you're shopping and you see this, look at the picture twice and think about it. The problem here is the plants that are now being posted online are like the Monsonia in the pot, and it's not actually the one you're going to buy. So you're getting photographs of things that are cultivated, but people are selling you wild stock. So the challenges are also resources. Like I've mentioned, this is a picture from the Karoo Botanic Garden in South Africa. There's a lack of space for refugee plants, as we're calling them. The poached plants, they need to be potted up. They need to be identified. They need to be cared for and put back in the wild if we know where they came from. If not, we're collecting seed to keep that genetic stock, and reintroduce where we can. Funding for this kind of work is extremely low on the agenda. Just trying to get funding for the studies I've spoken about for the AI is also extremely low. And we're currently seeing that there's not a lot of skills in the workforce for conservation horticulture. There's a lot of horticulture skills, bedding plants, displays, but conservation horticulture, when you're taking a species really knowing how to grow that conophytum as on the screen, or the orchid, and taking accessions, provenance, genetic sources, looking at meta collections. That kind of that skill is lacking, so we need to build that up as well. And then what we've also seen is a detriment to plant health and human health. And like I said, we're losing traditional knowledge, but countries like Mexico and South Africa, where their plants are being exported and lost, the indigenous communities are not seeing any revenue returning to them for the use of their genetic resources. So it's a catch-22. They are going out and poaching because they have no money, and the syndicates are forcing them to do this. But at the same time, the plants are going out of the country and they're not receiving any money, so they're still poor. So it doesn't actually help. And then this illegal trade actually has a huge risk of invasive pests and diseases for both plants and people. And then lastly, before I get on to some good news and some positive, because I feel like I'm just droning on about all these challenges. Once again, it's invasive species, it's new pests, it's Nagoya, it's refugee. So summing up from the previous slide, we've got this multi-pronged approach that we're going to need for all these issues. And we are seeing that a lot of crop plants are being affected by alien invasive species. We're also seeing that some things like spices and herbs that are being imported are actually being illegally harvested in the wild, and they're actually the wrong spices and herbs, and they're actually harmful to people, and they have cyanide in them. And it's not funny at all, but it's coming, and we're finding it in UK. We actually had a seizure at Heathrow for some star anise, which I cook with regularly. But this star anise, and you wouldn't know unless you were really an expert and you knew about it, is actually a Japanese star anise, and it's highly toxic. And it came in samples to be sold in the markets in UK. So there's a huge issue here with illegal plant trade. So Michiel, you mentioned, Michiel, these slides and the maps are compliments to him and thanks to him. We started looking at source and seizure data of species and mapping where they're going. And so, for instance, with some of the caudiciform species in South Africa, we see that they're going out of South Africa and they're going to Mozambique and Tanzania. And from there, it's a hub and it's spreading out. It's going to across to the US, it's going into Europe, and then a lot across to the east. So we've got a double problem here of poaching in one country. Then there's a hub in another country, but it's not the end destination. And then similarly with Chile, we've seen that species are going from Chile to Europe, being repackaged and then sold in the US as legitimate. And we've got to tackle that as well. So I'm really hoping my animation does work now. So we are seeing that the trade of succulents from South Africa is now, because we're on to Tanzania as a hub country with the previous slides, it's going straight from South Africa across to the US, but it's also going across to China, being repackaged, not cultivated and bulked up, just potted and repackaged and then back into the US. And this is the one we really need to concentrate on, because we do want to promote cultivated plants. We want people to buy species, plants, and do landscaping and just love plants. But we don't want this double poaching and selling of illegal plants. Now, from Madagascar, demand is now increasing. And we're seeing this it's just going out. It's actually quite pretty, looks like a bit of a flower, but it is increasing Pachypodium and euphorbias. It decreased a bit, but it's increasing. The one going across to Africa very interesting. We believe this is a hub country. We don't think it's a destination, but we don't have any data of where it's going from there. So what are we doing about it? So BGCI sat down with our International Advisory Council and highlighted this to them and realized this is a global problem and we need a global movement to tackle this. So we got together with the IUCN Center for Education and Communication for the Commission, and we developed this global campaign to tackle the crisis. And we're working together with other botanic gardens now to design a campaign for awareness, but also increasing capacity and skills both in the gardens and with law enforcement. So we're going to be looking at live plant trade because trade is huge. And we did an assessment and we're looking at the live plant trade because that's our bread and butter. That's what botanic gardens really do really well. We have our living collections. So we're looking at the live plants of cacti, cycads, succulents, orchids, but pretty much anything, anything that's alive. What we won't focus on is the seeds. Timber, definitely. Timber has its own task force for illegal timber trade. We won't do medicinal or cosmetics or oils and that kind of product. But it doesn't stop us working together with other groups who are in this field, in this realm, and sharing information. And if we come across anything that we think needs to be highlighted, we'll share that with the relevant groups, which we are now in contact with, and likewise, they'll share it with us. So we really want to harness the botanic garden knowledge and the power of the gardens. We want to change the perception of where plants are purchased. And as I said earlier, a lot of people are very naive of where do plants come from? They come from the garden center. You can buy them online, but that's not where they naturally occur. So we need to provide consumers with this knowledge and the questions and empower them to be able to ask, was this harvested from the wild? Do I need a permit? Is it disease-free? And has the exchange of permits happened when this plant has been sold or collected? And people don't know to ask those questions, and we want to provide them with the questions and the kind of answers they should be getting from the people they are sending their money to. We also want to work with industry. So it's not just the botanic gardens. We want to work with yourselves as societies. We want to work with the landscapers. We want to work with the commercial nurseries. It's a problem for everyone, and we need this multi-pronged approach to come together. And we do need to develop resources. And what we're doing now is developing a suite of resources for the awareness campaign, at least. And that is posters, social media posts, information packs, leaflets, depending on what a garden or an industry may need, and we're tailoring it to their needs. And botanic gardens are going to be the hub for this because we have our collections, we have our global networks. So we're going to start with them and they're going to spread the information out, all the pamphlets and the leaflets. They're also going to do the training that we're going to undertake with a lot of the enforcement officials, with the CITES officials, and within our gardens, we've got conservation horticulturalists who are going to go to other gardens such as Sandby, and train their staff in conservation horticulture. And we're actually developing modules with BGCI for online training for where we can't get people to exchange and go to other countries. It's really expensive. They can train online and we can mentor them that way. So what we did as one of the first steps now going forward is to conduct a technical review last year of our botanic gardens. And we had a survey of our 905 members and we got we got about an 86% return, which was great on the survey. We have 17 case studies with botanical institutions who share their knowledge and share their stories. And what we have found is a majority of botanic gardens are just looking inwards and dealing with their own theft that's taking place in the gardens, or how many species they're receiving that have been seized, and they're not outward looking, and they'd like to. So we're working with them on how to do this. And we're looking at more collaborations between botanic gardens, but also, like I said, with yourselves as societies and industry. So just some results of this. We asked gardens who have received confiscated plants where these plants were coming from, and the heat map on the left of the screen shows the pockets of where gardens are receiving material and where it's actually been sourced from, or at least the port of export, because that's what we know. So we're seeing that poaching is taking place in the US, Mexico, a lot happening in Chile, Southern Africa, and then also we're seeing in the East, and that's mainly orchids, as I'm sure you can see. We asked them what species, or at least the families that they frequently see in their seizures, and no surprise, it's mostly the CITES species, Cactaceae, Orchidaceae, and cycads. We've got the succulents. That's obviously been bumped up by the poaching that's taking place in South Africa. But across the board, all those families, you can see that we've got records that they're being received as seizures. So what can you do to help the campaign? We're going to launch this year in October. We're doing our data gathering at this stage, getting our ducks in a row, so to speak. We're getting all our materials. Like I said, we're getting our posters and our pamphlets and our online training modules, working with different countries and different stakeholders. And we have these different levels of involvement. We have outreach partners, and we can keep them up to date. We'd like a pledge that you'll support the campaign and you can use the products that we have. We do have action partners who will have early access to the training opportunities, and the organization will be listed on our website. And then staff are involved in relevant campaign activities. And then we have our keystone partners who are the top level, who are part of our steering committee. It does involve a financial contribution. They're invited to speak. They get discount at BGCI conferences and other partner conferences. And others, I mean, there's a list here, but it goes a lot more involved. But if you'd like to be involved at all, there's this, but just even an outreach partner would be fantastic, just to share the message that plants are being poached, plants are going extinct, and we really need to come together and promote the use of plants sustainably.